In what may be a stunning turn, a court has granted guardianship of the children of slain Microsoft executive Jared Bridegan to the parents of their mother, his accused killer, Shanna Gardner. Now, the decision comes after a fierce legal fight, with Bridegan's family claiming the Gardners are isolating the kids from them, as Shanna Gardner faces charges in her ex-husband's cold-blooded murder. The twins' future hangs in the balance. I'm going to speak with family law attorney Randy Kessler about this latest development. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Well, what might be a surprising decision, a Washington state court awarded guardianship of Jared Bridegan's twins to the parents of the woman accused of his murder. So not his parents. That's right. The court handed custody to the parents of his ex-wife, Shanna Gardner. Now, the court's decision, announced last week, places the two 12-year-old twins in the care of Sterling and Shelley Gardner, who have been looking after the children since their mother's arrest in connection to Bridegan's murder. And the court ruling comes amid this bitter family dispute over who should raise the children after, of course, their father's shocking killing back in February of 2022. When Gardner was arrested in August of last year, her parents took custody of the twins, and soon after they filed a petition for guardianship. But Bridegan's parents opposed this, and they filed a petition of their own back in June, requesting that they be appointed the guardians instead. And this latest decision is just a blow to the Bridigans, because they have expressed concerns about these children being raised by Gardner's parents. And I'm going to get to those concerns in a minute. But first, I want to bring on a special guest, someone who I haven't seen in quite some time, but always happy to see him, family law attorney Randy Kessler. Randy, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jesse.
So, Randy, I want to first ask, this is a complicated case on a lot of different ways, and we'll get into this a little bit more. Generally speaking, though, is this the right ruling from the court?
Generally speaking, probably so. It's always hard to second guess, right? We don't know exactly all the details and the negotiations and the evidence. And unfortunately, I've had cases very similar to this. This is what's, to me, fascinating about family law. There's a lot of emotion, right? Grandparents on one side are absolutely adverse to the grandparents on the other side. They have a lot of reason to have a lot of animus, a lot of anger, a lot of frustration. But really, it's hard, but you got to move all that to the side. That is not what it's about. The question is day to day, what's better for these children? And unfortunately, maybe fortunately, sometimes, the facts on the ground, the fact that the children have been in an environment for a certain period of time is more important than what the environment is. In other words, maybe his parents would be a little bit better for the children, but the change to move them from where they are back to another situation in a whole new environment, that whole change in and of itself might make it worse for the children than leaving them where they are. And that's the tough decision the judge has. And Jesse, judges hate custody decisions more than they hate making murder decisions and death penalty decisions.
Yeah, sure.
Because there's some innocent people still at stake.
Legally speaking, what do courts consider when awarding guardianship of children in murder cases, or I should say, active murder investigations? She hasn't been found guilty.
Well, the standard doesn't change. It's always what's in the children's best interest. It does change a little bit, though, when they're grandparents. Between two parents, all the court has to do is figure out what's best for the children.
Right.
If there's one parent that's available, then that parent almost always wins, unless they're really a terrible, horrible person, which might be the case here. But when it's between two grandparents, you go back to what's the best situation for the children. And what is the best situation for the children? You can't do it in a vacuum. You can't pretend that the children are living on an island and the grandparents are each in separate cities. The children are somewhere already. And the question is, can they stay in that place? Is that okay for them? Is that good for them? Or should we uproot them again, change their lives again, and hope that it's even better? Judges like to stick with what's working.
But just to be clear about something, it's not fair to say that courts generally, give the maternal grandparents more sway over paternal grandparents. It's case by case specific, right?
Right. I don't think that's what's going on here. I think the court probably gave a lot of deference to the children's current environment. And if their current environment is okay, and if they're thriving or doing okay or getting through it, the judge doesn't want to take a risk that he might make it worse.
By the way, I got to say, with our content, these videos, I think it's fair to say it just goes to show how important personal safety is. And you know where that's especially true? When it comes to protecting your privacy online. I think you would be shocked at how much of your personal information is out there, like your address, your phone number. Do you ever wonder why you get so many spam calls and emails? That's because all that information is public. But that is where our sponsor Incogni comes in. So this is a service that helps you take control of your online privacy by removing your personal data from data brokers, the huge companies that sell and trade your information without your permission. Here's the kicker. These data brokers have to remove you from their database if you ask them to. Now you're thinking, I don't have the time to call these data brokers. Well, again, that's where Incogni comes in. They contact those companies for you to get your online safety back. You don't have to do a thing, and then they alert you after the request has been completed. So I highly recommend giving Incogni a try. And right now, anybody who uses code SIDEBAR and Incogni.com/sidebar gets 60% off. That's code SIDEBAR and Incogni.com/sidebar for 60% off of an annual Incogni plan. So let's get into this a little bit. I want to get into some of the background on this case. So this custody battle is rooted in years of what is reportedly a deteriorating relationship between Jared Bridegan and Shanna Gardner.
Clearly.
So the couple, they divorced in 2015 after a tumultuous marriage. They had been locked in this ongoing legal battle over their children with reports of strained relations between them. And then, of course, we go to February 16, 2022, when Bridegan's life was tragically cut short when he was shot and killed in cold blood after dropping the twins off at the home of Gardner and her new husband, Mario Fernandez Saldana, in Jacksonville Beach. Now, the 33-year-old was ambushed in what authorities have described as a premeditated murder as he was driving home to St. Augustine with his 2-year-old daughter in the back seat. This is his daughter from another marriage. And shortly after the murder, Gardner moved with the twins to Washington State. It's part of one of the reasons that sparked suspicion that maybe she had something to do with her ex-husband's death. Her family has these ties to the Mormon community, and their successful arts and crafts company Stamping Up have made them prominent figures in Utah's social scene. But the Bridigans believe that they helped their daughter after Jared Bridegan's killing. And I'm going to get to that more in a minute. But Randy, I want to ask you, given the accusations against Shanna Gardner, how could the court assess the children's best interests in terms of, let's say, emotional well-being and stability? Their daughter is on trial for the murder of their father.
Well, nobody wants to have this hypothetical would be about them, but hypothetically speaking, right, she's innocent. You can't say, and that's what's interesting to me about the difference between criminal and civil. On a criminal case, nobody's found guilty yet. On a civil case, it's tipping the scales. But when you have children involved and it's a family law case, how do you put all the stuff in the blender and see what comes out? The bottom line is what's best for the children now. Okay, maybe 2 years ago, they shouldn't have left with the children. Maybe 2 years ago, maybe a year ago, maybe the children have grown, they've evolved, they've developed what we call a social network. They've got a social environment. They've got a history, a family, an environment. And so now to move them from one environment to the other is in and of itself a change. So we sort of ignore or we minimize a lot of the other facts that, well, what she did was wrong or what they did was wrong or moving the children was wrong. The judge has to start with, how are they doing now? And how do I not screw it up and make their lives worse? And that's a different way of looking at it than we look at things in a criminal case or even a typical civil case where it's more right or wrong. A plus B equals C. It's all gray. It's family law.
Yeah. That's a good point. There's no hard line test. And look, in the wake of Jared Bridegan's murder, the custody of these children became a central issue. And that brings me now back to the Bridegan's concerns about the Gardners raising these children, because in the Bridegan's petition they filed opposing the guardianship, they argued that the Gardners were trying to isolate the twins from them, saying petitioners will not allow any contact between the children and their stepmother of half-siblings. And they even suggested that the Gardners may have helped their daughter after this killing. Petitioners aided the mother in fleeing the state of Florida after the murder. Now, the Bridigans also pointed out that they had been involved in their grandchildren's lives since birth, that they believe they could provide a more stable and nurturing environment for them. And it's not just the Bridigans who feel isolated from the children, because Jared's widow, Kirsten Bridegan, shared her thoughts on the court's decision on Instagram, saying, "My heart has been heavier than usual this past week. This isn't what Jared would have wanted, and this isn't what I want. Let's hope and pray justice is served in the criminal case, since it definitely wasn't served in this one." And in a press conference following Gardner's arrest, Kirsten Bridegan expressed her sorrow over not being able to see her stepchildren.
For the past year and a half, Liam and Abby have been isolated and kept away from us while they lived with their mother, their stepdad, and their maternal grandparents. Despite my constant requests to see or speak to them, I have been denied and continuously ignored. I plead with the Gardners to put the emotional and mental well-being of Liam Abbey above all else and allow them to reconnect with us. We are their family. We love them.
So the question is, what led to this decision? Well, in an October filing, Rachel Woodward, who is an attorney representing the Gardners, explained that they had custody of the children for more than a year, that the twins had been living with them for almost 2 years, and Shanna Gardner, who is the biological mother, consented to her parents being appointed the guardians. Now, the court ultimately agreed with that assessment, and in last week's filing, the court described this decision was, quote, in the best interest of the children. There was this confidential agreement that was also reportedly signed by both the Gardners and Bridegan's, and a source disclosed to the Florida Times-Union that the agreement did include visitation rights for the Bridegan's. So, Randy, a lot of moving parts here. Let's first start with their accusations against the Gardners. Serious accusations, isolation, and I guess a fair assessment would be helping their daughter flee after she allegedly had a role in this murder. Those are serious accusations that I don't know how they were weighed by the court.
Right. Well, helping their daughter flee, that's a separate issue. They've not been even charged with a crime, much less convicted of a crime. So they're innocent of that. But the other stuff, the isolation, we see this all the time, even in normal divorces or custody disputes. It's called alienation. One parent is accused of alienating the children from the other side. And it's a really tough one. There's no real official diagnosis, no psychological analysis that really fits the situation. But it happens a lot. One parent says, love us, don't like them, they're the enemy. And they do it subtly or not so subtly. And the other side accuses them of doing it. But judges hear this over and over and over, and they say, you know what? That's just part of what goes on in a custody dispute. It's very, very hard to convince a judge that one set of parents or caregivers should have custody because the other side is alienating and isolating. Judges usually prefer to say, if they are doing that, let's fix the behavior. And it sounds like that's sort of what happened. There's a private agreement. There is now an agreement of some sort to have parenting time. And I would not be surprised if the agreement includes what we call co-parenting therapy or parenting coordination or a parenting coordinating expert to help take it away from the judge and put it into a more therapeutic environment. If there's a dispute, they meet with this therapeutic expert who says, this is how you phrase things to the children. This is how you communicate. You know, there are a lot of tips and tricks that we do behind the scenes to try to keep it out of court. But unfortunately, Jesse, we see this all the time. One parent who doesn't like the other parent can't prevent themselves or keep themselves from saying bad things about the other side. And the other side is always thinking, well, the kids wouldn't dislike me. It must be the other side telling them bad things about me. It's nothing I've done. It's that they're alienating. It's a complicated issue.
By the way, are visitation rights mandatory? Is there a requirement that there be visitation rights if the other side loses a guardianship or isn't granted guardianship?
No, everything's up to the judge, right? Even between parents, a judge can limit, can restrict, and the judges have all the power in the world. It's probably the most malleable, generic set of standards we have. And just think about it. What's in the children's best interest? Well, to me, that's different than what it is to you, than to your wife, than to whoever else. So judges have a lot of authority. And also, we always sort of, laugh about this when people say, well, let's appeal a custody decision. It's very hard to have an appellate court look at a transcript and read the papers and say, well, based on what I read in the transcript, I think the judge made the wrong decision. So judges are pretty insulated. They know whatever they craft as the solution for parenting time or no parenting time is almost always going to be upheld on appeal. There are rare occasions when that doesn't happen.
Can I ask you about that? Do the
Sure.
Bridigans have any grounds for an appeal? How would that work?
Well, first of all, I don't know what the agreement is. It sounds like they agreed. So once you agree, you probably waive your rights to appeal. You can't appeal something you agreed to. But they could appeal. But again, it's almost always better to try to work within the trial level and the negotiation level because appeals are so hard. And also, when you appeal the decision giving the other side custody and then you lose, then you have to go back to the other side and say, okay, please give me some time with my grandchildren, with my children. It makes it even harder to work it out therapeutically. So appeals are very uncommon, very hard to win. But in extreme situations, sometimes that's all you can do. Throw yourself on the mercy of the court, so to speak.
If there's a change of circumstances too, right?
That too. If things change, well, you go back to the trial judge first. If the judge says, no, there's no change, I'm going to leave it the way it is, then sometimes you have a bit of a toehold because you can say, Judge, Court of Appeals judge, the parents moved across the country and took the children away, or the grandparents moved. That's a change. I mean, that changes everything. And this trial judge didn't even think that was important. You can try that.
Let me ask you this. Something interesting, sad here, is that Shanna Gardner, she's clearly alive. She gives consent to her parents to be the guardians. Jared Bridegan's not. He's deceased. So he's obviously not in the ability to say what he wants to happen with the children. Is that fair? Is there something not right about that?
Well, it's definitely not right because of how he died. But think about it if you can, and this is where we get creative. If there wasn't an accusation of murder, if it was a tragic accident and he died, would then his parents have any right to tell mom what happens with her children? No, we as a society say that the natural parent has all the rights. If she gets convicted of murder, that changes things.
Okay, that's fair. I'm glad you put it that way. Now, look, let's be clear about something. This decision comes against the backdrop of ongoing criminal investigations into Jared Bridegan's murder that led to 3 arrests, including Gardner, because in January of last year, authorities arrested Henry Tenen, who was reportedly in contact with Gardner's husband before and after the murder. He was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, second-degree murder with a weapon, accessory after the fact, and child abuse. By March of 2023, Tenen pleaded guilty to the charges, agreed to testify against Gardner's husband, Mario Fernandez Saldana, who was also arrested the same day on charges of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, solicitation to commit a capital felony, child abuse. And then, of course, it was only a matter of time after that before Gardner was indicted on similar charges and arrested in Washington, where she had been living with the twins. But, you know, Randy, I want to get your take on this. So Shanna Gardner, she is facing trial next year. If she is convicted, let's put a bow on that. Does that affect her? Well, it affects her parental rights, but does that affect her parents' rights? Could that lead to a new round of legal battles?
I don't know that it affects her parents' rights in and of itself. If they were co-conspirators or they knew about it or they facilitated and they helped, I don't know if that changes anything. The parents could become model citizens even if they weren't 10 years ago, the grandparents. And the judge is still going to probably look at what's best currently for the children. But I do want to point this out, Jesse. You know, a lot of legal experts are saying, including me, she's innocent until proven guilty. So why do we, judge her? That's the criminal standard. In a civil standard, you don't have to prove she's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And the fact that somebody pleaded guilty, that there are all these charges, a judge in the civil case, in the custody case, could say, I think she had something to do with this. In my mind, I think she is guilty, not in a criminal sense, but
or
in a
just
civil
the
sense.
trauma of it. If their mother's arrested facing this, what's in the best interest of the children? Is this an environment they want to be in? I mean, I guess that's another consideration.
Right. And again, I've been in situations like this where had it happened at the beginning, it might have been much better for the children to be in another city, away from all the drama. Maybe the grandparents take the children and move to New York or Idaho or somewhere else. But we don't have that ability to go backwards in time and reestablish the children's lives. And that's really the struggle here, is the judge is working with, here's where the children are. If I think they're doing okay, I don't want to mess them up anymore. They're getting back on track. And that's where all the evidence comes in, when the guardian and the experts come in and say, here's how they're doing now. Maybe it's more fair to the deceased, to the victim's parents, to have the children with him. But it's really not about what's fair to them. It's not what's fair to the victim. It's what's best for the children. And that's really, it's a hard analysis. It's not black and white. It's not right and wrong. It's all gray.
And by the way, going back to the criminal case for a second, this is one that is filled with its own set of legal battles. So in fact, earlier this year, Saldana and Gardner's attorneys, they fought to have the prosecution team removed from the case after they argued the prosecutors violated their attorney-client privilege by accessing communications on their devices, including something that was referred to as a timeline. That motion was ultimately denied. But then Gardner's team filed a motion accusing a detective of lying on the stand during a bond hearing. Gardner's high-profile attorney, Jose Baez, who you might all remember from the Casey Anthony trial, he argued that a detective wasn't telling the truth about speaking to a witness and that the government misrepresented text messages that Gardner apparently sent to a friend before allegedly hiring a hitman to kill Bridegan. And Baez implied that the messages were a joke.
This is textbook lying and hiding the ball by Detective Johns. And the fact that the prosecutors were present during these questions is another matter altogether.
And Baez also requested that Gardner be reconsidered for bond, but that was ultimately denied in a later hearing.
I've carefully considered the evidence that was presented during the last hearing, and I've granted the state's motion for pretrial detention and denied the defendant's motion to set bond. I'm filing that now.
Now, Randy, I just want to bring you on this real quick before we wrap things up. Do you think the judge made the right decision denying Ms. Gardner bond? If you have any thoughts on that?
I do. I mean, I think that the judge made the right decision. Again, it's hard to second guess. You know, the judge is balancing so many things: the risk of flight, the fact that she's innocent until proven guilty, the fact that somebody else has pled guilty, the state's case seems to be growing. I think we're on the verge of trial and maybe the verge of a conviction. It's much harder to get bond when the judge thinks, I think you're probably going to be convicted more now than I thought 6 months ago, a year ago. Sounds like the right decision from what we know.
And look, Shanna Gardner and Mario Fernandez-Saldana, they are expected to stand trial in October of next year. And prosecutors have indicated that they are seeking the death penalty for both of them. So that is going to be a trial to watch out for in 2025. Randy Kessler, so good seeing you. Thanks so much, my friend.
Great for having me again.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.